All right, it is time for Good Take, where every week Mike and I share our very best takes about the things in and around the NBA that we've been cooking up during the week. We've each prepared our own take, and after we share them, the winner of last week's episode will get the and one. As always, you can vote for the best take on the Real GM Radio YouTube community page. Mike, you're up first.
Yeah, so my take is about Jalen Duren, and it is that this is going to be the most interesting restricted free agency battle that we've had in a very, very long time. Restricted free agency typically isn't that exciting. There's a penalty for other teams that are coming in and they're making offers. They have the incumbent team can wait a day before they decide to match, and that money is frozen until then. And in free agency, things move fast. You can't afford to spend 24 hours with a massive offer sheet that is tying up your salary cap that you can't use that money then. So, but I think that this particular case could really stretch the idea of like what we can do with restricted free agency. So right now, Jalen Duren, he turned down reported offers of $30 million a year last year to bet on himself, which frankly at the time I would have been like, you just averaged like 11 points a game the prior season. Like maybe you should take the $30 million a year offer if it's on the table, but he didn't. And that is smart. He's going to end up with more than that, I think, even with his playoff struggles. But this is a guy who very plausibly could make all NBA, which would open him up to a contract that would be 5 years and $287 million if he gets a 30% max. He's not going to get a 30% max. All right. I think we can set that aside for now. A 25% max, however, still starts him at $42 million and would end up being something like $237 million, $239 million over the next 5 years. Whew, that's a lot of money to tie up in a guy who is having one of the worst postseason drop-offs in recent memory. His scoring average is down from almost 20 to barely 10. His true shooting led the league in the regular season. True shooting, mind you, has dropped nearly 14%. Now he's like below league average as a center who only basically dunks and lays it up. He had dramatically improved his turnover rate in the regular season. It's one of the keys to his success this year, actually, is that he just became an average turnover guy instead of a fumble it out of bounds all the time guy. Now he's fumbling it out of bounds all the time, and he's one of the playoff leaders in turnover rate. It's been such a dramatic turnaround. And on like a reasonably big sample size we're talking about now. This is 12 games. This isn't like a 4 or 5 games like stretch. And the Magic, sure, kind of a tough matchup. The Cavs are a team with more slender interior guys, and Mobley, defensive player of the year, et cetera. But Duren is bigger. He is stronger. He had one beautiful move last night where he caught the ball, aggressively attacked, spun off Mobley and dunked all over him. And you're like, why doesn't he do that, 3 times a game instead of once a series? So 22 years old. Again, he was the most improved runner-up. He's possibly going to be all NBA. But he's not a great three-point. He's not a shooter at all. He's improved his defense dramatically. He's not a great rim protector. He's not like the anchor defender that you want. Are you going to be comfortable paying him $40 million a year? I'll pause there for you. I have some more thoughts on this.
It's such a fascinating question, right? And it's so hard to remove the recency bias from this because right now I'd be like, absolutely not. No freaking way am I paying Jalen Duren even close to $40 million a year. But you look at what he's been doing, 65% shooter during the regular season. He wasn't bad in the playoffs last year. So this isn't like a thing with Jalen Duren. He was fine in the playoffs last year for what he was last year. And then he made that dramatic improvement this year. And he was so important to everything that they were doing. And then we saw those moments where Cade was out at the end of the regular season, and Jalen Duren was even better, a hub offensively as a triple handoff guy and as a playmaker, a short roll guy. He was flashing that ability a little bit. His raw talent, size, and physicality is so off the charts too, where I'm just like, this guy's going to be a very good center in the NBA for another 10 years. I mean, he's just built like an absolute truck.
Yeah.
And no real injury history to worry about. So you think the guy plays a ton of games, plays a ton of minutes.
Well, here's a list of centers.
But then you get to the limitations of his game too, and it's like he doesn't have any of that unicorn stuff where you'd be like, now we're gonna pay him up at the level of an Evan Mobley because
he's
he
the opposite
have
of a
that
unicorn.
Kind of ceiling. Right. This is the best version
no
of Jalen
3,
Duren,
no
I
D.
think. Yeah, no 3, no D. Like it's just like this is the best version of Jalen Duren, and that's okay. If he's this for another 10 years, it's a really good player, but it's not close to a $40 million player, I don't think.
Yeah, here's the problem is there's just a long list of centers who are inarguably better than him, and then a surprisingly long list of guys who are in his neighborhood. So Jokic, Wemby, obviously. Chet Holmgren has surpassed him pretty clearly this year, I think, at least in terms of constructing like a winning team. You'd rather have someone who looks like Holmgren than a guy who looks like Duren. Karl Anthony Towns.
Yep.
Bam Adebayo.
Yep.
I think Rudy Gobert pretty unquestionably better, even though it's a little trickier because Gobert's so limited offensively. But Anthony Davis, when healthy, maybe better. And then it's guys like Alperen Şengün, Joel Embiid, Ivica Zubac, Jared Allen, maybe, or Isaiah Hartenstein. Like Duren's not worse than all those guys, but he's not better than all those guys. So you're talking about someone who's going to be the 7th, 8th best center in the league next year, and you're going to be paying him 25% of the salary cap. That just gets the math gets so hard in, a 2-apron league where it's like essentially a hard cap.
The other thing I would say, he's 22 years old.
Right.
You just don't see you don't see teams walk away from a 22-year-old who's going to be one of these all NBA teams and has the kind of production that he has, right? He's not like a modern center where he's shooting threes, but the guy is going to be a 20 and 10 guy or an 18 and 12 guy for like the rest of his career. He's a natural partner with Cade Cunningham. He sets great screens when he's totally engaged. He makes the life of the star player, the face of your franchise, easier, and it's really hard to walk away from that player. Look, ultimately what I think is going to happen is the Pistons just pay him. But his restricted free agency is going to be really interesting to see if a team like, do the Lakers come in and offer him this crazy offer sheet, right? Like, to your point, I don't know the last time, like this is the anti-Jonathan Kuminga and Cam Thomas, right? Where it just felt like nobody was interested in those guys. And so we were just waiting forever to be like, are they going to sign a contract ever last summer? With Jalen Duren, I think if this is maybe closer to what the DeAndre Ayton restricted free agency was.
Yep, exactly.
In 2022, the Pacers made that huge offer sheet to him. The Suns ended up feeling like they had to match it. And even reporting after that was like Phoenix wasn't super thrilled about matching it, but they felt like they had to. And that was 4 years, $133 million at the time. You go back also to like Zach LaVine in 2018, where the Kings made that initial offer sheet and the Bulls had to match it. And even the reporting after that was like the Bulls were like, well, that was a lot of money for LaVine, but we kind of have to keep him. What's interesting to me about this is the new apron world, the new CBA. We're gonna get to a point where one of these teams, and I don't know that it's gonna happen with Jalen Duren, but we're gonna get to a point where a front office just says, you know what? No. You wanted to try to big ball us and come in with this huge offer sheet? Go ahead. Take them. Now this contract is your problem. Again, I don't know that that's going to happen with Jalen Duren. I kind of feel like Detroit's just going to match it. I don't think that they're the front office to do this. But there's going to be a point where somebody does in the NFL. This happened with Kirk Cousins a few years ago. They don't have restricted free agency in the same way, but I think it was the Washington just said, yeah, we like Kirk Cousins, but we don't like him at this number. And you never see NFL teams just walk away from serviceable quarterbacks. And very rarely in the NBA do you see teams just let go of serviceable starting centers. And Jalen Duren, by the way, serviceable is like, insulting. He's a very good starting center. But we're going to get to a point at one of these times where in this new apron world, a team is just going to be like, we just don't want to tie up that much of our cap into this player. We'd rather actually start from nothing, even knowing we don't maybe have the exact replacement for this player right now. We want to preserve the flexibility. But again, I think the Pistons end up just paying him.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tricky, though, because, Alperen Şengün, for example. So the Rockets are actually one of the teams that are most interesting because they have played hardball with their RFAs a little bit, not even by soliciting offer sheets. They just haven't given guys like automatic maxes off of, promising third, fourth years. So Şengün signed for 5 years, $185 million. Okay. That started at about 34. It'll be like 36-ish, I think, this coming year. That sounds about right to me. I think Şengün's a very similar player stylistically, kind of similar strengths and weaknesses. And then let's say that's the offer that Detroit wants to make. 5 years, 185. Maybe they'll throw a player option on like Houston did for Şengün to make it feel a little bit better. Would the Lakers come in and drop 160 and be like, hey, Duren, not only are we going to give you more per year, we will let you get to the market a year earlier when you're going to be 26 and can still lock in another massive contract. Would the Clippers do it? I think they might be an interesting one because they could free up a good amount of money. Yep. And I think, a guy like Duren would be a really nice partner next to Darius Garland and whichever player that they draft 5. Like, I think they're kind of a sleeper for like at least eyeing this situation. Could Chicago be interested? They have a hole at center, a massive hole at center. And, if they obviously have the 4th pick, but there aren't necessarily centers on the board there. So I think that they're a team that could be looking at this. Like, there are teams that would be interested in Duren more so than guys like, you mentioned Kuminga earlier or something like that. Like, I think Duren is a guy who will have value. And I think Detroit has to be careful because there is a winner's curse situation here, right? Like whoever pays Duren the most is probably the guy who overvalues him. If you're that far from consensus, that means you're probably wrong. And so if you end up with too high an offer in the apron area, you just cripple your team for a long time with contracts these long. So I don't know where they're going to go. I suspect you're right. Like it's just so hard to let go of a 22-year-old guy who's on the rise in, all NBA, but there's a very real chance that a center who never becomes an elite shot blocker and never develops a jumper just puts a floor or a ceiling on your team that is too low. And if you're a team with a top 5 guy like Cade Cunningham, and you know how I feel about Cade Cunningham, like I think that's a guy who definitely can carry a team right through to a championship. You have to be really smart about who you put around him during his prime. So that's all I'm saying is I'm going to watch it because I do think there's a lot of interesting pieces.
The other part of this too is if you're trying to build around Asar Thompson.
Yeah.
It's now our top 3 guys, 2 of them are not complete non-shooters. Like, do we and Cade, as much as he's improved as a shooter, that's not really his like teams. Like, I think we're gonna get to a point where teams are gonna like. There's certain matchups where teams are just gonna go under on every Cade screen and just dare him to beat him from beyond the arc. It feels like you need an elite shooter around Cade at one of those spots. Now, again, just because you re-sign Jalen Duren as a restricted free agent doesn't mean that you can't get there at some point. Like, even if you re-sign Jalen Duren now, you could trade him later. Again, all NBA center, 22 years old, you can get 2 years into this contract and flip him for a better fit. If you just let him walk away for nothing, now you're losing that potential asset. But it is something I think that the Pistons are going to have to consider here.
I think offense first centers are a lot like a new car. They lose value the second you drive them off the lot, especially since we've seen over and over again that if you're not like literally Nikola Jokic, you're not going to be as good in the playoffs as you are in the regular season. Like how many guys who look like this have been better in the playoffs, where it's like they're offense first guys who can't shoot. It's like Alperen Şengün, DeAndre Ayton, like Jakob Poeltl isn't really offense first, but like, I don't know, man. I just think that like there's a real chance they go another year. Duren has another bad postseason. And then they're like, uh-oh. And other teams are like, uh-oh is right. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
it's true. You risk the asset sort of diminishing there. Do you think that Jalen Duren can become a good rim protector? Because there's no reason why he couldn't. He's got all of the skill, the size.
I think he can become a good defender. I think and we've talked about this. This was one of my hot takes, one of my good takes from 3 or 4 months ago, is that he had dramatically improved defensively. Yeah. And I think that's true from a controlling the space, understanding where to be, hitting the boards. I do not think he'll ever be an elite shot blocker, rim protector. I don't think he has quite the instincts for it. Like, it's a lot easier to become one of those guys if you come in blocking every shot and fouling the crap out of everybody and you learn how to tone it down to the appropriate level than it is to go from being a non-shot blocker to an elite one. That kind of leap almost never happens. He takes a little too long to load up on his jumps and he just doesn't have like the instincts for it. So I think he can become a plus defender, but I'm not sure it is the kind of plus defender that lead to real rim protection, which is kind of what you need in the playoffs.
Yeah, I wonder if Detroit's scheme isn't really serving him in a lot of these matchups too. Like if they were going to just aggressively drop him and just let him kind of be 7'1" by the basket, I wonder if that would be a little bit better. But you're right, there is a little bit of, is he the Michael Jordan of DeAndre Ayton's thing happening right now with him? And as good of as a player as that might be, there are inherent limitations to that. It's going to be a fascinating restricted free agency, and you're right. I think there's a ton of teams that could talk themselves into him.